Good evening. First tonight, the murder of Chester Allen Pogue remains one of the grisliest crimes in South Dakota.
My son's life was cut way too short. He was never able to marry and have children to give me grandchildren.
Torture inflicted upon Allen Pogue was unprecedented in this state's history.
Welcome back for more True Crime South Story. As you may have guessed, today we will be talking about the cruel and brutal torture and murder of Chester Allen Pogue, the man who just wanted to play some video games with his friends but ended up enduring intense physical and psychological terror that would end his life. Chester Allen Pogue was born on July 4th, 1980, in Norton County, Kansas, to parents Dottie and David Pogue. His younger sister Samantha was born 2 years later. Chester grew up on a farm just outside of Norton, South Dakota, but moved with his family to Rapid City, South Dakota in 1994. After the tragic loss of his father, Chester moved with his family back to Norton, but later moved to Spearfish, South Dakota, while Pogue attended Northwest Kansas Technical School. On March 12, 2000, Chester Pogue invited some friends over to his house to play video games. These friends included Briley Piper, Daryl Hoadley, and Elijah Page. Pogue's mother and sister, who also lived at the house, were on vacation in Florida at this time. The four friends sat enjoying their Sunday evening, talking and playing video games, but little did Chester know something sinister was brewing. After hanging out and playing games for a while, Piper, Page, and Hoadley convinced Pogue to leave the house, and the four left in Pogue's Chevrolet Blazer, headed to the house where Piper, Page, and Hoadley had been staying. However, shortly after arriving at their destination, Page pulled out a .22 caliber pistol, which he had stolen from Pogue's mother's closet. He then ordered Pogue to the floor and told him they were taking all of his stuff. With Pogue now defenseless lying on the floor, Piper knocked him unconscious by kicking him in the head. While Pogue was unconscious, he was tied up with a cord and sat upright in a chair. When Chester regained consciousness, he started to cry and pleaded with the group to let him go. In response, the group forced Pogue to drink a concoction of crushed pills, beer, and hydrochloric acid. The group had emptied his pockets, gone through his wallet, and found his debit card. Page then forced Pogue to give him the PIN number for the card, to which he complied. Page and Piper then openly discussed their plan to kill Pogue, including slitting his throat, but decided against this particular plan because it would get too much blood in the house. This discussion concerning the best way to kill Pogue was carried on directly in front of him. It is unclear whether all three of the assailants planned on stealing items in the house so they could buy drugs, or whether just Piper and Page had been in on the plan. It is also unclear whether they initially planned to kill Pogue or just to beat him. However, what is clear is that the initial discussions as to killing Pogue were limited to Piper and Page, and only after it was decided to kill him was Hoadley informed of the plan. After forcing Pogue back into his own vehicle, the group drove approximately 7 miles to a remote wooded area in the Black Hills known as Higgins Gulch. Once at Higgins Gulch, Pogue was forced out of his vehicle into a foot of snow. Page and Piper stripped Pogue down naked except for his undershirt, shoes, and socks. The temperature that night was only about 25 degrees Fahrenheit. Next, the men forced Pogue to walk downhill toward a small creek. On the way to the creek, the three ordered Pogue to lie down in the deep snow. At that point, Piper, Page, and Hoadley kicked snow all over the victim's exposed body. When Pogue attempted to escape to save his life, Page ran him down, recaptured him, and pushed him into the icy creek. The group then began beating Pogue, with Page repeatedly kicking the victim in the head. Pogue cried out in pain throughout the beating, but his screams only caused more kicks. Page kicked Pogue in the head so much with his boots that it made his own feet sore. Sometime after beating Pogue in the river, the group decided it was time to finally kill the victim. Page was the first to stab Pogue. As he lay in the freezing water, Page took Pogue's head in his arms. When Pogue asked him, "What are you doing?" Page responded, "Just sit there." Page then plunged his knife all the way into the victim's neck. Piper then proceeded to stab Pogue in the head. During this time, Piper laughed and made jokes about the pain Pogue was experiencing, to which Page chuckled. Bleeding badly from his wounds, but still alive, Pogue asked the three to be allowed back into his vehicle to warm up. Pogue said that he preferred to bleed to death in the warmth rather than in the cold. Piper told Pogue he could warm up in the vehicle if he first washed the blood off of himself. Pogue proceeded to rinse himself off in the icy water, but as he crawled uphill toward the vehicle, Page told him they were lying and he would not be allowed back in the vehicle. Page then kicked the victim in the face once again. Pogue was then dragged back into the icy creek. Approximately 4 hours after the ordeal began, and about 3 hours after the beating started in the gulch, Page and Hoadley finally ended Pogue's life by dropping several heavy rocks on his head. Piper, Page, and Hoadley drove away from the secluded area in Pogue's vehicle. The group returned to the victim's house and stole several items. For his share of the victim's property, Page claimed a stereo system, clothes, and Pogue's vehicle. The group then traveled to Hannibal, Missouri to visit Piper's sister. Piper's sister refused to let them stay, however, so the three headed back to South Dakota, pawning Pogue's property along the way. They also used his stolen ATM card 6 times in various locations between South Dakota and Nebraska. Upon returning to South Dakota, Piper, Page, and Hoadley went their separate ways. The body of Chester Pogue, lying in the icy creek, would not be discovered till over a month later, when on April 22, 2000, a woman discovered a partially submerged body in Higgins Gulch. A forensic pathologist later identified the remains belonging to Pogue. Showing signs of head injuries and stab wounds, the mostly naked body was clad only in an undershirt, shoes, and socks. Following an autopsy, the forensic pathologist ultimately determined Pogue had died from stab wounds and the blunt force injury to the head. On April 25, 2000, law enforcement authorities conducted an interview with Hoadley, wherein he gave a statement detailing his involvement in the murder of Pogue. Based on this interview, warrants were issued for both Piper and Page. 3 days later, authorities located and arrested Page in Texas. The following day, Page voluntarily described to law enforcement the details surrounding Pogue's murder. Page was then extradited from Texas and jailed in Lawrence County, South Dakota. Piper also gave a statement which described Pogue's torture and murder, as well as his participation in the crime. Page and Piper later pled guilty to and were convicted of first-degree felony murder, kidnapping, first-degree robbery, first-degree burglary, and grand theft. The state did not offer a plea agreement. Page waived his right to both a jury trial and sentencing by jury, and instead requested sentencing by the circuit court. At the conclusion of a 5-day sentencing hearing, the circuit court sentenced Page to death by lethal injection, finding that the state proved beyond a reasonable doubt the following aggravating factors. The defendant committed the offense for the benefit of the defendant or for another purpose of receiving money or any other item of monetary value. The offense was outrageously vile, horrible, or inhumane in that it involved torture, depravity of the mind, and an aggravated battery to the victim. Piper took a similar approach as Page, waiving his right to have a jury determine his sentence. Judge Warren Johnson sentenced him to death on January 19, 2001. Hoadley, however, unlike Page and Piper, did not waive his right to have a jury determine his sentence. He also pled not guilty at his trial. After the jury deadlocked 8-4 in favor of life in prison, he was spared execution. Hoadley was sentenced to life in prison in 2001. By August 2006, Page ordered his attorneys to stop all appeals and just allow his execution to proceed. He reportedly said that he was tired of living the life of a condemned man. Page waived his appeals and sped up his execution. In an official letter from Elijah Page while behind bars, as he decided to stop appealing his verdict, he wrote about the night that he murdered Chester Pogue, their plan, and detailed the level of involvement of his friends. He wrote, "To whom it may concern, I am writing this letter so that people will know the real truth, and not the misconstrued version that the state has put together for you to read and know. On March 12th of 2000, Piper, Daryl, and I had set out to do what we did every night, find our next bag of weed and get high and hang out. Ending up at Alan's house wasn't what we planned, that just kind of happened, but it was there that we decided to rob him. It was not right then the decision to kill him was made, that came later. The only plan that we had was to get Alan to my house, have one person keep him busy while the other two went back to rob him. Somehow, that plan went radically out of control. It was Daryl's and my idea to kill Alan. Piper really wanted nothing to do with it at all, but if Daryl and I were in on it, we weren't going to let Piper be out of it. I don't think Piper ever really knew that it was mine and Daryl's idea. I still believe that he thinks that Daryl was made to go along with it like he was. To manipulate Piper was easy. I simply told him that if he didn't go along with what he was told, I was going to shoot him, and then after that I was going to shoot his sister. Anyone that knows Piper knows that he loves his family, and that he would give up anything for them. It has been reported that Piper was the ringleader of the three of us, and that is completely false. I mean, how could he be the leader if I was telling him what to do? I can't tell you why he pled guilty. That's something only he can tell. What I can tell you is he did not kill Alan Pogue. I killed him along with the help of Daryl. Other things that happened, like why Piper decided to help rob Alan's house, you would have to ask him, but if anyone is responsible for the death of Alan, it is Daryl and I. I am writing this because I have decided to end my appeals and face execution. But before I could do this, I had to let people know. I have nothing to lose or gain from this. I just simply want people to know the truth from someone that was there. Signed, Elijah Page. Elijah Page was scheduled for execution in August of 2006, but was granted a last-minute reprieve from Governor Mike Rounds due to concerns over the legality of the mixture of drugs that were to be used for the lethal injection. South Dakota's death penalty law stated that executions would be carried out by using an ultra-short-acting barbiturate in combination with a chemical paralytic agent. But the plan of the penitentiary staff was to use the 3-drug protocol that most other states use. The legislature updated the death penalty statute to include the use of the 3-drug mixture, and the new legislation became effective on July 1st, 2006. Finally, nearly a year later, Elijah Page was executed shortly after 10 p.m. on July 11, 2007. Among the witnesses to Page's execution was Dottie Pogue, mother of the murder victim Chester Alan Pogue. Lawrence County Sheriff Richard Melwell, who watched the execution as well, said the death penalty was the appropriate penalty for what he called a brutal, torturous murder. I can assure you that Elijah Page had a much quieter, quicker, and apparently painless death, he said, but I can assure you he will never be able to do this again. Briley Wayne Piper continued to appeal his conviction, and in 2009, the state Supreme Court overturned the death sentence, arguing that a jury should decide his fate. After deliberation, the jury revealed his new sentence in August 2011. Piper was, once again, sentenced to death. Piper attempted to appeal this decision again, however, it was upheld in 2019. Piper remains incarcerated at South Dakota State Penitentiary awaiting execution, and is now the only person left on death row in South Dakota. Daryl R. Hoadley, who was sentenced to life in prison, remains incarcerated at South Dakota State Penitentiary. Chester Pogue was buried at Norton Cemetery in his hometown of Norton, Kansas. All of this pain and suffering driven by greed causing 3 men to betray their friend who just wanted to hang out and play some video games goes to show how you can never really know someone's true intentions, and danger might be waiting, lurking right next to you. Thank you all for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more, and I'll see you on the next one.